All right, man. Welcome back to the God Centered Men's Recovery Podcast. I am your host, Tim Holloway, and I am glad to be back at you again. Hey, look, this podcast is dedicated for Christian men inside of recovery to live an awesome spirit-filled life. That is you, then you've come to the right place. Hey, I want to encourage you to click on the link in the description. That'll take you to information concerning our GCR groups. These are our groups that take place throughout the week. We have one on Tuesday, we have one on Wednesday, and we have one on Sunday. This is for men only, and this is for accountability and for recovery. And they are awesome ways to just get connected and get established and get discipled. So if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to do so. It's an amazing place to be. So we're going to jump into our topic today, and it is one of my favorite parables, but it's the parables of the talents. And you'll find that in Luke chapter 19, verse 12. If you're new here, we're going through the book of Luke and gleaning out any information that is relevant to recovery and to the life of discipleship. And so we are already in Luke 19. After the book of Luke, we'll be traveling to the book of John and going through that book. So I'm actually really excited to do that book. So Luke 19:12, he said, "Therefore a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return." And so he sets up the parable about this nobleman and puts, really, in my opinion, God in the place of that nobleman. And in this parable, there are certain different people that are inside of it. The first one, of course, is the nobleman, which would, of course, represent God. So this nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. So two things established here right from the beginning, or actually three. The first one, that he was noble, that he was rich and he was powerful and had the ability to do these things. The second thing, he went to receive himself a kingdom. Now, I think that's really important for the gospel, because this is what the story and the narrative is all about. We are told to pray, His kingdom come and His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so this king that that we have started a relationship with, and we have entered into this kingdom, that is the mindset that we need to have. His kingdom come, His will be done. Now, the third thing in this is that he was going to return. And so this is really setting out the scenario and the story of man. There was a certain nobleman who went away and to receive himself a kingdom and to return. This is really the whole narrative and story of the gospel. And then, of course, it's talking about Jesus. Luke 19:13, he says, "And he called his servants, and he delivered them 10 pounds. And he said unto them, Occupy till I come." And so this man was powerful, and he had servants. And now enters the part of the story where we come into play, right? And so we are his servants, and that is people that are under his authority, under his kingdom, and who are subject unto him. And so I find that, very important inside of life, inside of recovery, to thoroughly establish my position of who I am and who we are. And so in that context and in that frame of mind, is that we are those who are subject unto the king. We are the king's subjects, right? And so that means we're under his authority. Now, the next thing in the parable is that the nobleman delivered the king's, or delivered his goods to his servants. And so that's where we begin to understand who we are as subject to the king, and what we have in our hands is that what has been committed to our trust. So he took his goods and he placed them into his servants' hands. Now, I find that to be the reality of life. And that is, as we accept our identity of being, subject to the King, and that He has entrusted us with His goods, and that is the whole scope in the view of life. We have been entrusted. There has things that have been placed inside of our hands, inside of talents, inside of abilities, inside of skills, inside of all of these things. And that He has delivered those into our hands. And He says this, the third thing in this scripture, is occupy till I come back. And so I think, especially in the life of recovery, we need to kind of step up to this mindset, because recovery is more than just being sober. Recovery is more than just abstaining from lust and perversion and all of these things. That God Himself has went metaphorically to receive Himself a kingdom and to return, and that He has servants, us, and we are under His subjection and under His authority, and He has delivered things into our hands, and He gives us the admonition to occupy till He comes. Now, what does that mean? Now, occupy has definitely an aggressive forward stance. It is definitely something proactive. It's not, He did not say, you know what, I'm going to deliver these talents, skills, and abilities into your hands, and I want you to sit around and do nothing until I come back, right? No, He gave this aggressive action word that means to occupy. When I think about this word, I think about, of course, the military, and they go inside and they occupy different states and different cities and stuff like that. My father was born in Germany, and that was when America, after World War II, began to occupy Germany. And so with that mindset, I see this aggressive stance of coming forward and an aggressive movement. So there's a lot of action that is involved, inside of that word. When we go into the definition, it means to be busy with. That means to sell and trade and to take up a business and begin to do certain actions. And so I find that very relevant inside of recovery, that we're not to sit around and do nothing. We're not to sleep the day away and all of these different things, but we're to rise up inside of our responsibility and take our authority and say, you know what? The King has entrusted me with these talents, skills, and abilities, and I'm going to occupy. I'm going to make advancements. I'm going to make forward progress. All of that is just really, really powerful action words. And I think it rises up inside of us a responsibility to utilize what has been entrusted into our hands. So Luke 19:14 says this, but the citizens hated Him, and they sent a message after Him saying, we will not have this man reign over us. Now this continues the narrative of what is taking place in the world today, and that is that there has been entrusted within God and entrusted within His people certain responsibility, this, that, and the other thing. But we also have the same thing taking place, is that there are people rising up that hate Him, and they detest Him, and they persecute Him. And they persecute anybody who takes on His name. And there's an extreme hatred and this same mindset that's coming forth that says, you know what? We hate this man, and we will not have him reign over us. Now, there's multiple different reasons for this hatred. I think, first of all, is because people fail to come into the light because their deeds are evil, right? And that is that they would be exposed for what they are and who they are. And so instead of coming into the light, they maintain their position, and they fire up animosity against Jesus. So this very word is to have an extreme hostility. Now, this is not some passive hostility, though. This is very active hostility against the principles, against the message, and against the person of who Jesus is. And that is definitely taking place inside the world today, and it's taking place inside of this parable and inside of this narrative, so we could fully grasp everything that's going on. So if you followed me thus far, there's a great nobleman who represents God, right? And he has these servants, and he entrusted his servants with his goods, and he says, you know what, you are responsible, and you're going to occupy until I come. And there are those who say, you know what, I hate this man, and I refuse to allow this man to reign over us. Now, this idea of reign is to have dominion, to have rule, and of course to have influence. And so this is saying, you know what, I'm not going to be influenced. I'm not going to be swayed by the Spirit of God. So why is there so much hate? That's the question that comes to my mind. And so I look at this in the gospel, and you see that Jesus was a major disruptor. And just to define what a disruptor is, we have market disruptors, we have religious disruptors, we have national political disruptors, and we have all these that fall under the term disruptor. And what that means is that they interrupt the normal course. And that is in the political thing, people have certain beliefs and mindsets and course of actions, and then a disruptor would come in and disrupt all that up and change all the plans, right? Of course, that would cause people to get really pissed off. And so you see Jesus showing up on the scene as a major disruptor. It's a disruptor to religiosity. It's a disruptor to tradition. It's a disruptor to all of these different things. And so Jesus was hated most because he threw a wrench in the chain, and that everything was moving forward in the will of man and the way they wanted. They were advancing their political power, their religious power, and they were able to maintain control, and they were just going forward. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes in and he throws a wrench in all that, and that, of course, causes problems. And so I find this true. The same hatred is inspired for the same reasons, that it throws a kink in the chain of sin. It throws it throws a wrench in the chain of political things, worldly things, lust, perversion, addictions, and all of these things that Jesus shows up on the scene and disrupts it. And I'm really happy, in this recovery sense, that Jesus disrupted my life. And that is, there was a mode of thinking, there was a belief system that I had, there was the motivation that I had and the desires that I had, and I was moving forward with those desires. And then, of course, came this disruption and this change that began to happen. And so that's why I think one of the biggest reasons this hatred comes from is really the mindset and the spirit of Jesus as a disruptor. And, I see it most in breaking culture. Jesus ate with sinners. He spoke with women. He did all of these things that the religious elite were opposed to. His followers weren't elite with all these religious pedigrees. A lot of them were fishermen and tax collectors and all of these different things that basically were the outcast and the rejects of society. And so that was a major disruption. So the cause of hatred was the fact that he was a major disruptor. So Luke 19:15 says, "And it came to pass that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he commanded these servants to be called unto him, to whom he had given the money, to know how much every man gained by trading." And so this is kind of the day of reckoning, right? And so if you're following along, the master entrusts his goods. He said, "Occupy till I come." Okay? This is the point where he comes back. It's the day of reckoning, the day of responsibility, the day of accountability, and it's going to see what the person gained. That is what the Bible says. What they gained by trading. So this process of gain is something of growth and development. It's much like planting a seed and coming back and check on the seed to see if it has grown and produced something. Or coming to the tree in a certain time and saying, you know what, I'm going to pick the fruit of this tree. And so all of this signifies a day of accountability and a day of reckoning. And what we see here is that gain was expected. Progress was looked for. The master thoroughly expect that his servants would utilize and take advantage and do as he said, which was what? Occupy, put in work, do the things that are laid out before you, which correlates to utilize, take advantage, utilize the talents and resources and skills that have been placed inside of your hand. And this, I find, is a great motivator for recovery. And that is that I'm not just focusing on being sober. I'm not just focusing on abstaining. That I'm focusing on occupying, and that I am going to utilize what has been placed inside of my hands. And so moving on, the different servants had different results, right? And he distributed his talent, skills, and resources to each servant. There was not a servant that didn't have something placed inside of his hands. And there wasn't a servant that didn't have the same admonition that was to occupy until he comes. And then, of course, different servants had different results. And as he began this accountability process with his servants, he said to him, "Well, thy good and faithful servant. Because you have been faithful in a very little, you will have authority over 10 cities." And this is the story and the analogy of accountability and the reward for such. And the first thing that he said in here is well done. And that is this idea of being approved. This is idea of satisfactory, meeting the expectations for your conduct and for your actions, right? And I kind of see a smile on the face of the nobleman when he says, "Well done," that you have thoroughly done what I expected you to do. I placed something inside of your hands, and you utilized that talent, skill, and resources and did something great with it. So, the first one is well done. You did what was proper. You excellent job, good job, right? Pat on the back, good job. You see all these things. And I find that would be an amazing event to participate in. And to hear your maker and hear your creator say, "Well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of the Lord." And, I just find that to be a very, very powerful thing. So secondly, he says, because you've been faithful. Now, faithful has this idea of being steadfast in your affection. And that is that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all of these things. But faithful, steadfast in your affection and steadfast in your allegiance. Inside of a marriage, it would mean that not to step outside of a marriage or not to desire another person who is a woman outside the marriage. That would be classified as faithful. So what he's saying here is that you have fully done what I said. You have fully utilized the things that I placed inside your hand, and that you are the kind of person who is trustworthy and dependable. Now, there is a very mistake and really focusing only on the amazing qualities of God and understanding how faithful He is and how dependable he is, and not allow that same spirit or that same thing to be said of us. And somewhere along the way, we have drifted away from our faithfulness as being important. And we say it a lot of times in many different ways, but it's all about the faithfulness of God and not mine. And we give all these, nice little sayings that excuse our lack of allegiance and our lack of faithfulness. But the reality is that God inside of the story has entrusted us with talent, skills, and resources and said, occupy till I come. And that there will be a day of accountability, and that is to see your allegiance, to see what you have done with what he put in your hand. And there is going to be a moment whether you are considered trustworthy, dependable, and faithful or not. And not only that, but a rewarding for doing so, which is awesome. So in the third thing here, he says that he was going to give them more authority, right? Well, because you have been faithful, you are going to be given more authority, more jurisdiction, more control, more delegated influence. And what he was saying is, because of what I have entrusted you with, what I have put in your hand, you have been faithful in your allegiance and have utilized those talents, skills, and resources, that I am going to entrust you with even more and even greater things. And what we understand with this is that that God is coming in his kingdom. And the real thing that's going on inside of this life is a preparation to rule and reign with him. And so this life is merely a character building process to shape and to mold us into the people that we are to be. And that is to give us the talent, skills, and resources, and that we begin to utilize those. We begin to go straight with our allegiance to God, and that even greater things, greater authority, greater entrusting is going to come to us in the future. So many people have this idea of heaven, of sitting on a cloud, playing a harp, and singing songs to Jesus, right? And we don't thoroughly understand this concept of him coming in his kingdom and us ruling and reigning with him. And so part of this is really grasping what's at stake here. And that is what is really going to take place on the other side, or even on this world when he comes to establish his kingdom, and what is really going to take place. And that is, once again, this idea of entrusting more to us. And I find that to be an awesome reality. And I do think that it's not stressed enough. Many people receive salvation and they talk about going to heaven one day, but they don't thoroughly understand the concept of his kingdom coming and being established upon this earth and ruling and reigning with him, and being entrusted with tasks, being entrusted with cities, being entrusted with authority to exercise his dominion and his will upon this earth. That's an amazing reality. So Luke 19:21. This is talking about the one servant who didn't utilize the what God had placed in his hands. And he says this, for I feared thee, because you are a stirred man, and you take up what you haven't laid down, and you reap where you have not sown. And so I want to talk about the man who failed to utilize his talents, because I find this, a very important narrative inside of recovery. This word fear comes from the word phobia. In the Greek, it's phobio, but it means to drive by force and fright and panic. And what this means is that this servant who has been entrusted with goods and told to occupy, he allowed fear, fright, and panic to drive his decisions. He allowed that fear to hide his resources and to not utilize them. And so basically what he did was he allowed this fear to not really do what Jesus said to do, and that was to occupy. And I find, inside of a fight, and that's what I've talked to you about, this word occupy is to make advancements and begin to occupy a city, utilize your skills and so forth. That the thing that would keep you from advancing would be fear. Afraid of the fight, afraid of the battle, afraid of utilizing your talents and skills and people not accepting that, afraid of having haters, afraid of all these different things. But the bottom line is inside a recovery, we have to ask ourselves, am I going to be governed by fear? Am I going to allow fear to control me and to manipulate me? If you haven't noticed, the world system works on fear. And that is stock markets and shift and profits and losses and all of these things are governed by fear. There has been a rich, elite people that knew how to understand market and people's mindset and sentiments, and they're able to make billions and billions of dollars based upon inspiring fear. And the world system works on this. And the way that it really works is that they are the creators of fear, and then they come through as the solution to your fear. And so these people have mapped out the human psyche and the mindset, and they have studied thoroughly to the nth detail on how to manipulate the masses. And here's one thing that we need to really understand. Anytime that I feel driven by fear, it is not from the Spirit of God. It is not going to be beneficial to my recovery. It's not going to cause any growth or development inside of me. So these feelings of fear, we got to understand that they are placed upon us through media, through sources, through all of these different things, through political narrative and all these stuff to motivate us to a certain action. And you hear it in political campaigns. It doesn't matter what you say. Each side is spreading fear of the other. If this person gets elected, this is going to happen. And then on the other side, if this person gets elected, this is going to happen. And what it all is fear-based motivations that doesn't come from the kingdom or from the Spirit of God. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we going to be driven by fear? Are we going to allow that fear to intimidate us? That we're going to go and bury our talent, and we're not going to utilize our resources or our skills, and we're not going to occupy until He comes. And then that's what that fear is meant to do, to drive you into a cave, a metaphorical cave, if you will. So we had this fear, and the nobleman says this. And verse 19:22, and he said unto him, out of your own mouth I will judge you. And you wicked servant, you knew that I was a stared man, taking up where I have not sown, and so forth. And so he says, I will judge you out of the words of your own mouth. And this seems to be very harsh, but he calls him wicked. He calls him wicked. Now, this really is hard for us to grasp and to swallow, inside of our Christianity that's doesn't have any sharp edges, right? That's very calm and collective and all of these different things. But Jesus very well labeled this man as wicked and said that he was going to judge them, and that he was going to call into question his faithfulness. This word wicked here has the idea of disintegration. And that is, instead of it advancing and growing and becoming what he could have been, he declined in quality. He declined. And he went backwards, and he sunk into a condition that was below normal. So moving on, Luke 19:26. For I say unto you that every one of you which has shall be given, and from him that has not, even what he has will be taken away from him. And then he goes into this last statement that I find very, very powerful. But those of mine enemies who would not have me reign over them, bring them here, and I will slay them before me. And so what we got to understand is that, Jesus is a lamb. But when he comes back, he's coming as a lion. And that is that he's going to destroy them who destroy the earth. And that bring about the annihilation and the destruction of the earth. And if he doesn't step in during that time, then there will be no flesh alive upon the earth. That's pretty much how the scenario plays out. And so what we got to understand is that we are serving a great king. And not only is he the lamb who is loving and sacrificial and lay down his life, but he is the great king that is going to rule this world. And that we are going to begin to rule and reign with him. And that it's going to be a great moment of reckoning for those who refuse his rule and reign inside of their lives upon this world. So, what can you grab from this? First of all, a major sense of responsibility. And that is that we have been entrusted with something to do. And that we have been told to occupy until he comes. And that is that we are taking this forward action of growth and development, and that we are moving forward and advancing, and that we are not sitting around doing nothing. And that we're going to take up our responsibility in everything that he places inside of our hands. We are going to utilize. And I think it's very important, inside this mindset to say, you know what, I'm going to be aware. I'm going to have my eyes open. And I'm going to begin to look to the things that God places inside of my hands. And that I am going to put these to work. And that I'm going to do something beneficial. And when the day of reckoning comes, I will hear, well done, you good and faithful servant.